Okay, so I see death day in and day out, and people are always surprised when I tell them it doesn't make me sad. So through my experience as a hospice nurse, I have found that being around death is not depressing and it's usually not very sad. So I hope with this video, I can kind of change your mind too and let you see the beautiful side of death and dying. I've been a nurse for 15 years, and most of those years were spent in the ICU, which is a place where we are trying to keep people alive. So most people would think that that would be a really rewarding place to be. And I can't say it isn't for everybody, but for me, the longer I was in the ICU, the more and more jaded I became. I had compassion fatigue. I was totally burnt out. I felt like I had to hurry up and care for people, which feels impossible as a human. And it really didn't feel rewarding. It really felt like I witnessed suffering day in and day out. Don't get me wrong, I mean, the ICU has its place for sure, and it saves many lives, and I learned so much in my experience as an ICU nurse. I wouldn't take it away for the world, I'm glad I did it, but I will say the ICU for me was much more depressing than a hospice nurse or my hospice experience has been. I think it's because in general, in America, we are afraid of, well, in the world really, I think we're afraid of death and dying, and we will try to avoid it at all costs. And we have been taught in healthcare to prevent death at all cost. And sometimes, to me, I think that makes people suffer far more. So in the ICU, I experienced so much more suffering. It felt so much more depressing than being a hospice nurse ever did. I started realizing that death sometimes is inevitable. And if someone is going to die, which a lot of people in the ICU are, I felt like we were doing them a disservice by not telling them or their families and allowing them to die in this hospital setting. And that got me thinking about there has to be a different way. There has to be a better way to do this. If someone is going to die, what other way can they do that? And do they really want to be in a hospital bed unknowing that they're dying? So that's what got me started. I started thinking then about becoming a hospice nurse, and eventually I just did it. So there are two problems that I see. One, we have a healthcare system that's fully avoiding death and only focusing on extending life, which I think creates a lot of suffering. There is a time and place for doing everything to keep someone alive, but there's also a time and place to stop doing that. And we're really bad at deciding when that conversation should be had. And the second problem I see is that we are not having this conversation with patients or their families. We're either not having it at all, we're not being honest with them at all, or we're having it far too late. And I don't want to blame anybody. This isn't really the healthcare professionals' fault, I don't think. I think it's the system that we are brought up in. We are not taught this in nursing school. We are not taught this, at least not very much, in medical school. And it's certainly not really talked about in the hospital. As a healthcare system, we need to start talking about death and dying early, far more early than we are, and work on being open and honest with our patients and our families. So this is where hospice comes in. When I first started being a hospice nurse, I had a lot to learn. It was a huge cultural shift. I went from being an ICU nurse to just hopping right in to being a hospice nurse. And what I had found over time is that it wasn't depressing. I thought it would be sad. I thought it would be really hard to be around this type of environment all the time. But what I found was, the more honest we were with our patients and our families, the more relief that came over their faces. You know, people finally felt like they were in a safe space with healthcare workers who were willing to talk openly and honestly about what was happening to them, what they can expect, and how we were going to help them. And day in and day out, I was meeting with patients and their families and talking about these things. And the more I did it, the more I saw how helpful it was and how beneficial it was, and how leaving a house after I discussed these really serious and quote unquote sad topics, I would leave the house feeling like I really helped someone. They were thanking me immensely at the door about how much I helped them. And not that we need tons of thanks as healthcare workers, but it's just surprising that this type of topic, these types of conversations, we think are going to be met with like anger or fear or denial. And most of the time it's met with thank you. And I'm so relieved. And I have a better grasp of what my future holds. You know, most of the time people are just happy that we're willing to talk to them about it and be honest. So no, it's not depressing. It feels like an honor. It feels like I am thanked day in and day out at my job. And again, not that that's what we're here for, but it makes me feel like I'm actually doing something to help people and help the world at large. So I feel completely satisfied in my work, which I was not feeling in the ICU. A lot of times in the ICU, I was feeling like I was butting up against the system and doing a disservice to patients and our families. And with hospice, I truly never feel that. So I hope that can give you some insight into my line of work and how I don't find it depressing. I hope this video also helped you see that this type of work is not depressing and that hospice doesn't have to be a sad place. Let me know in the comments your experience with this, and don't forget to subscribe for more death and dying information.